But even before the World Economic Forum officially kicked off, the cohort of investors, executives, and elected officials who attend Davos were already buzzing about a remarkable letter, a letter from a person well known to them but virtually unknown outside of their circles. Billionaire investor Seth Klarman, well regarded for his management of $27 billion at the Wolff Group, wrote a 22-page letter to his investors warning, quote, "It can't be business as usual amid constant protests, riots, shutdown, and escalating social tensions." Here to discuss this eye-catching caveat to the world's global elite is Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor, welcome again. I suspect there's a significant overlap between your perspective and Mr. Klarman's. First off, he wrote, "Social cohesion is essential for those who have capital to invest." Is he right to warn that unrest may begin to develop in real threats to the current system? What do you think?
100% correct he is, absolutely. You know, it's an old truism that most reasonable people understand. You cannot have an economy functioning, any kind of economy, but a capitalist one for sure, in a society that is literally falling apart. You can't rely on your workers to show up. You can't rely on what they will do if they do show up. You can't rely on the relationships between them and their families in terms of what they will buy and what work they will do and what political movements they will support. And all of those things are now up for grabs, which is why this famous investor and manager wrote that letter. And look, let's look around the world. The yellow vests in France are making it impossible for that society to function because they've had it with an economic system that makes a few people very rich and the mass of people having a harder and harder time. We're seeing it here. We've had more strikes of public school teachers in the United States in the last 12 months than we had in the preceding 25 years. You'd have to be blind and deaf and dumb not to see that this is a society that is being wrenched apart by the inequality that is being produced here and by the instability. The bubble bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2000, the income and mortgage crisis of 2008, and so on. And so he's saying, pay attention to these social consequences, because if you don't, they will come back and undo the economic wealth you've created.
So I wonder, Professor, I mean, how do we deal with it? So the facts are, you've helped us speak about them on the program before, the whole, income inequality issue that we want to talk about, we do talk about. So you have this known guy, Mr. Klarman, who, is part of sort of the system, the capitalist system, and I just wonder how we deal with fixing things. If you're that famous saying, Professor, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. How do you go about changing things in a realistic manner, not just, bomb throwing? What do you think?
Well, I think there are both short-term and long-term responses that ought to be made. You might call them reform on the one hand and more basic change on the other. Here's some reforms, including those that Mr. Klarman himself has endorsed in various forums. You could change the tax structure. We have decreased the level of taxation on wealthy people and on corporations for the last 30 years. It's one of the major reasons we have this inequality. We ought to change that. I don't mean doing something we haven't done before. I mean going back, say, to the tax structures in the United States of the 1950s and 60s and 70s, when the highest income people paid a much higher percentage of their income in taxes than they do today. They've had a tax cut beyond anything average Americans have seen, and that can be and should be reversed, because that would put resources into the hands of the government that can provide services, jobs, and so on to the mass of people who need it. Let me give you an even more stark example. At the Davos meetings, the most important institution in the world that measures inequality, Oxfam in Britain, presented a report, and the bombshell of the report was this: the richest 26 individuals in the world, people like Buffett and Gates and folks like that, Jeff Bezos. The richest 26 have more wealth than the bottom half of the population of this planet, 3.8 billion people. And just follow me with this. If we took half the wealth of those 26 people by a tax, they would still be the 26 richest people on this earth, but we would have an enormous improvement in the standards of living of 3.8 billion people, so that they don't have to die early, that they can do for their children what they hope to be able to do, that they can live decent lives. I don't know of anyone with a serious ethical or moral commitment, religious or otherwise, who wouldn't see in this a better way to go. But in the longer run, we got to do something about a system that delivers this kind of inequality. We don't have a system that distributes the output that we have, goods and services, in a way that is fair to everybody. We deliver to a few people an enormous part of it, and to the rest of us, we're worried about the meal next week, we're worried about giving our kids a college education. This is not the way to organize the distribution of the goods and services we all help to produce in our different ways. And that's the basic change, though, that we won't have this kind of inequality disrupting our societies in the future.
Yeah, boy, I couldn't agree with you more. And whether or not it's at the ballot box or other means, but trying to get some of these changes would be very helpful. I did note, just finally in closing, Professor, that Mr. Klarman warned about the debt in Britain, Canada, Spain, and France, saying that, quote, the seeds of the next major financial crisis, or the one after that, may well be found in today's sovereign debt levels. And we were pleased to have you on not too long ago and talk exactly about that issue. So we were ahead of it, and I'm glad you mentioned that Oxfam report. We touched on it the other day, but you added a lot of more texture to it. So we appreciate you for that. And we hope you'll come back to continue to help educate us. Professor Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you. Be glad to talk with you again.